meets you, you are the first introduction to the Bible to them. So as Christians, we need to remember that. We need to remember that when we are out and about, it is by our actions that they decide whether Christianity is okay or not. That's why right now in our country this is scary, because even Christians are splitting when it talks about government and all this other kind of stuff. So it's important that we remember the life we live shows other people what Christian really means. Now I realize there are some churches where I would have trouble sitting in the pews, I'll be honest, because they're so judgmental, that bothers me. But if you can demonstrate your faith to another person, you truly are demonstrating Scripture to them. Thus, you really do become a vocal and seeing Bible to other people. Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. We need to find out in our life what your purpose is. God calls everybody into some sort of work, ministry, it doesn't matter. Now, by definition of Jesus Christ, we are all called to ministry. I'm just called to be a separate path from the path you take. I'm called to speak the word, and you're called to show the word to other people. So if you can figure out what direction you are supposed to be doing, and by the way, that doesn't always stay the same. I'm much different preaching to you now than I was in 1998. 88. Forgot when I went. So there's difference because you discover things as you get older. You know the saying, it is true. If I only knew what I know now, back when I was a teenager, it might have been a whole different ballgame. But God in his infinite wisdom lets us figure out how we are supposed to live. Jan is correct. We make mistakes. We always make mistakes. I make mistakes, a lot of them. But I know that even though I may err on something, I'm already forgiven. Even when I find myself ripping up who I'm supposed to be, I know that God has the tape to put me back together. When we are hurting, God has the way of taking the pain away. Now that means, and I really need to make this clear because people don't get this. When there is a loss of a loved one and time has passed and they say you shouldn't feel or act that way, that's an incorrect statement. What they're saying is, I can't handle the way you're handling it. So however you're handling it is okay. I used to give out a book which was the 10 steps of grief. I don't anymore because every time somebody read it, they thought they had to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In grief, you could go 1, 8, 6, 4, just doesn't depend. But they were so geared on that they would even come into my office and say, oh, Pastor, I'm not following these 10 steps. You are, but they don't have to be in that way. So I'm going to ask you this morning to do something for us that's really difficult. I'm asking you to look in the mirror. I'm asking you to look in the mirror to a point that all you see is your eyes. What is being reflected back? Because when we look in a mirror, we're not really being critical of ourselves most of the time. I mean, I get up in the morning, use an electric shaver on both sides, trim if I have to, and I'm out the door. So I'm really not looking. I'm just kind of making sure I'm somewhat okay. Now, ladies, I know you look a little bit more than we do, but that's the way it is. But when you look into the mirror, then 1 Corinthians comes true. When I was a child, I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I saw dimly in the mirror. And what that means is when you were a child, you did whatever a child does. But when you become an adult, you are seeing the presence of God, but we won't see it completely clearly until we meet him face to face. Thus it says we see dimly in the mirror, but our reflection's there. If you can look in the mirror and you see your eyes and you can say your name, I'll do it, demonstrate it for me. Mike, you are a wonderful person. If you can say that 3 times out loud, and it doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, you're okay. If it doesn't, then you need to work on your self-esteem. This is a tool I use all the time in counseling. 3 times in the morning, 3 times at night. And if you haven't figured out, there's a reason for 3, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Please don't step on the prosper one. That's called prosper theology. When if you follow Jesus, your bank account's supposed to grow. I've been doing this almost 31 years, and our bank account has not grown. So don't get all crazy on the prosper. Prosper in this case and in this verse means you'll be okay. Think of it that way. You're going to be a better life if you follow him than you thought. Thus, plans to prosper you and not harm you. God does not harm people. That's been taken away. When Christ came on the earth, God stopped wiping out towns and everything else. Thus, I always tell people, if you never read the Bible and never read it at all, please start with the New Testament first. The Old Testament will scare you by the time you get through it. Then go back and read the Old Testament, and you'll see how we got to where we are today. Ecclesiastes 3:1, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. That's almost self-explanatory. That means things happen in life. They just are. But if you're having a rough time, if you give it up to Jesus, things get a little bit better. So that means there'll be times when you are sad. There are times of joy. There's a time when you're going to be mad, and there's times when you're not. There's a time to plant and a time to harvest. There's a time for death and there's time for life. It's trying to tell you that no matter what, there'll be things that happen in your life, and it's just being alive. God didn't hit you in the back of the head and say quit. Or God doesn't punish you. That's the promise. When Christ was sacrificed, the promise is you will no longer have to sacrifice. Thus, you know my reasoning on Lent, that I have trouble when people say they're giving up Lent. For me, and I'll say it this way, if you believe differently, God bless, it's okay. But for me, if I'm giving up something for Lent, I'm making light of what happened on the cross. He died so we no longer have to sacrifice or suffer. 1 Peter 2:9, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possessions, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light. If you're going around and it just feels like life is heavy, you really need to run to the cross. Because you're not getting the whole light that comes from God. No matter what life will throw at you, as long as you're looking at an empty cross, figuratively, things get better. They'll never go as fast as you want it to. I figured that out already. I know it won't get as good as I want it right now. God is not a drive-up McDonald's or Burger King or whatever that may be. It don't happen. It really doesn't. Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. What is good, acceptable, and perfect. Now you know why I say positives from God, negatives from Satan. If we are supposed to have what is good and acceptable, that's not negative. That's positive. And since it's positive, what we get from God should be positive. It's kind of the thing where, I hear this every once in a while. And I've even lived it with some people. When somebody dies in their family, they'll say, why is God mad at me? God's not mad at you. He's not. I can't tell you why it happens. I can't. I wish I could. It says that he goes beyond understanding. And when I meet him face to face, I'll automatically know. And that's the one key thing about when eternity comes. I say this too. It's a human thing. When I see God face to face, I'm going to ask this, and this. The funny thing is, when we step into eternity, we'll know everything automatically. We don't have to ask. It's fun to think about it. I write down things I'd like to ask God from time to time. And then I laugh at myself because I know it's going to be the answer the minute I'm there. It's not like I have to sit down with him and go, God, I got a few questions to ask you. No, you already know. James 1:26, if anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. The reason churches struggle is because of what I just read to you. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Millennials especially, and even the Z generation, are struggling with what we call corporate worship. This is what this is called, by the way, today. It's corporate worship. Because they hear us outside of this building, and I'm not saying you do this, it's just an example. When we go outside, we don't act in their head very Christian. And we say hurtful things. Why do you want to be a part of something that people talk hurt all the time? They don't. It's counter what the message should be. It is true. The Bible's a love story from beginning to end. God is love. If that's the case, why aren't we being more loving? Why aren't we sharing the gospel in a loving manner? You don't have to beat somebody up to get them fired up about anything we do in this church or any other church. Demonstrate what you feel, and they'll want to be a part of it. And you'll never know when that seed will be planted. I'll give you an example that happened probably a couple of years ago, shortly after I retired from coaching. And I'm in JC's, and this lady comes up and says, Coach D. I have no idea who she is. There's too many parents. I couldn't remember everybody. And then she started talking about her son, who I remembered. And she said for freshman to sophomore year, he would not go to church with him. He was animate. He said, I'll go in the car, but I'm sitting in the car. He wasn't going to go. His junior year, he comes home, and he says, if Coach D can be a minister, and he's a coach on that football field, I might as well go to church. So he goes to church. Today, he's the worship leader of the church. So you never know when you're going to plant a seed in somebody. On the football field, I was goofy as goofy could get. And that's the way we should act as Christians. We should be joyous. We should just be, they'll go, you follow Jesus and you're that nuts? Yes, I am. Matthew 7:21-23, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Only that day may we say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name? And then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Excuse me. What that passage is trying to tell us is we can say we follow Jesus. We can say that we are Christian, but your actions your mouth and your heart, if it's not in the right place, then your religion is lawless, as written by Matthew. Life increases various eternity. It does. And we have given to us the unique power to touch other people's lives, to demonstrate, to be honest with them, to say to them when they are hurting, I've been there. To say to them, in my case, I have an incurable disease. I know what that's like. You've lost a loved one. I know what it's like. But guess what? Through the grace of God, I made it through. That's the key. That it is by God we do things. It is by his grace that you and I are here today. And if we can take that grace from our heart and our mind and our soul and share it with others, then the acronym is correct. Life increases faith everywhere. Amen.